learn something here this morning, something new and different. You know, when I was in college, way back when, I was a biology major, and I remember my fourth year as a fourth-year student in biology, I studied biochemistry one term, and the textbook for biochemistry was the thickest textbook I've ever seen. It was about 4 inches thick, which suggests to me that there was a lot of knowledge, even back in the 1970s, about biochemistry, and in particular biochemistry of the brain. But it's interesting to think that what we know today about biochemistry dwarfs what we knew back when I was in college. This is a rapidly growing field, and I suspect that if Dr. Nedley were to have given this presentation to us 10 years ago, it would have been a different presentation in many ways than what he's going to be presenting here this morning. And if he comes back in another 20 years, or less, I hope, his presentation in 20 years would probably be very different than what he's going to give this morning. So don't think that you know everything already. I fully expect that you're going to learn something here this morning. Now, before we begin, I would just like to open with prayer. So let's go ahead and bow our heads. Our loving Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your love for us that is beyond our ability to fully comprehend. Lord, we thank you for how you have designed us in just amazing ways, that your creative powers are beyond our ability to ever even begin to comprehend. And Lord, this morning, I expect that we are going to learn something about your design of the human brain, the most complex thing that you have made. There's so much to know and so much more that we can learn that we will never learn at all. But as Dr. Nedley presents this morning, I pray, Lord, that you would be with him, that you would give him just the words that you want us to hear this morning, to learn more about our brains, our minds, and how they function, and what we can do to optimize that through nutrition. And help us to have the discipline to really apply what we're going to be learning here this morning, so that we really can fully utilize these wonderful brains, these wonderful minds that you have made us with, so that we can do your work here on this earth to bring many, many people into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. Thank you, Lord, for these blessings. Thank you for your love. And we pray in Jesus' name, amen. It's all yours, Dr. Nedley.
Thank you. It's good to be with you again this morning. Are you able to hear me? Not yet. Okay, good. So, although I agree with what was stated in the introduction, truths about nutritional biochemistry actually don't change. So there are some things that are going to be foundational truths that'll be the same as they were, 20 years ago, and 20 years from now, is what we're going to be presenting. And some of the primary aspects of nutritional biochemistry are not going to really change, but we keep learning more, and we keep learning nuances that can be very helpful. And to a large extent, I know there's been books written on this subject, one of them by William Walsh called Heal Your Biochemistry, Heal Your Brain, which is, there's a lot of truths in that book in regards to healing the brain through biochemistry, and we'll actually get to some of those truths here in the second half today. But I also want to reveal the fact that even if you have perfect biochemistry, your brain can still have problems. And it can actually still have distorted thinking. We need to realize that Lucifer had perfect biochemistry, but he still got into distorted thoughts. magnification, emotional reasoning, a lot of these things, mental filters, etc. And so it's not just biochemistry. I know we had one individual come through our program, and he was so focused on the biochemistry, he didn't want to have anything to do with anything else in the program. And of course, nutrition is only, I mean, it's a very important piece in the program, but when we take a look at the whole comprehensive approach, it's only about 10% of the entire comprehensive approach. And so, but it's a very important 10%. And so, he didn't want to have anything to do with the 90%, he just wanted to have to do with the 10%, and of course, looking at all the data that we were generating from his blood and urine tests in regards to what's going on in his brain, synaptic activity, all of those sorts of things. And we were able to provide him some significant benefit by determining those biochemical factors and getting things in shape. But although his brain was now set up to be able to analyze his thoughts for distortions, he had no willingness to do that because he thought it was 100% biochemistry. And since he wasn't willing to try to even correct his own thoughts, that was a significant barrier. And so sometimes we can major in biochemistry, in nutrition in the brain is not a minor per se, but if that's our only emphasis, 100%, we're going to have problems. And of course, this is one of the reasons why the pharmaceutical industry is limited as well, because the pharmaceutical industry is all about biochemistry in the brain. And it's very well known that the pharmaceuticals have their limitations. And unfortunately, because they're foreign substances, they also have their side effects. And so what we're looking for is to try to get benefits without those side effects. And sometimes it's a lot more beneficial when we look at how we can change nutritionally. Now, this is where every pharmaceutical company in the world is trying to manipulate. This is called the Synapse. And this is the number one selling drugs in America. If you work at a pharmacy, you are seeing drugs fly off the shelves that are manipulating things in this synapse, and this is where communication occurs. Let's say this is, we didn't have, I had my own computer system here, but this might work. Is this the one that has a pointer? Hey, maybe not. Yeah, can you see that up there or no? No? Is the pastor here? He told me he had a neat way of being able to point on both screens with this thing that I have in my hand, but I haven't figured it out yet. Not being able to point at the screen. Let's say those little molecule buttons. Oh, you're going to show me here, Alex.
Just hold and move this way. Do you use pointer like this?
Yeah, there you go.
Highlight or pointer?
A pointer would be good.
Okay. Just hold any direction.
So this will actually point it? Okay.
Yeah.
So where you saw it here, and can I see it over here too?
No, you
Oh, you only have to see it here. Whoops.
go back maybe.
Okay, so maybe that's why I wasn't seeing it. Okay. So right in this area here, in that synapse, serotonin is being released. Let's call that serotonin. It's not actually labeled there on the screen. And if and of course, it's electrical signal that is causing serotonin to be released. And if a receptor is there for serotonin, you can see these receptors are designed enough to bind on to that molecule serotonin, then a synapse occurs. In other words, there's synaptic activity, another electrical signal goes, and communication is occurring in the brain normally. Now, once that synapse occurs, or that synaptic activity occurs, the serotonin that was bound here actually gets released, and it is actually vacuumed back up by these reuptake channels. There are little channels there called reuptake channels that are to store serotonin. The brain is very efficient. It doesn't want to waste things. And so after that synaptic activity, it wants to vacuum the serotonin back up into that neuron. Now, the drugs, when your doctor gives you a drug and says this is going to help your serotonin level, is it going to actually help that neuron to make more serotonin? Is it going to help you build up more receptors to bind onto serotonin? No. So how is it working? How is it helping your serotonin levels? It actually is blocking. No, it's not facilitating reuptake. It's actually blocking the reuptake channels. These molecules are designed to be vacuum cleaner pluggers. And so they plug the vacuum cleaners for serotonin to go back up into the neuron. Now, how does that help your serotonin level? Or how does it help the serotonin activity or the serotonin synapse? It actually, if you have a shortage of serotonin to begin with, which often this is why these drugs are prescribed, because there's a shortage of serotonin in that neuron, and so there's not enough serotonin released to be able to produce a synaptic event. If you plug the vacuum cleaners, the serotonin is around for a longer period of time to be able to bind on and produce synaptic activity. But what do you think happens over the course of a year of taking this medicine? When the reuptake is being blocked and the vacuum cleaners are plugged and you had a shortage of serotonin to begin with, you actually cause the very thing that they were designed to treat. Because now there's a much greater serotonin deficit because we're not able to vacuum the serotonin in. The only serotonin that nerve makes is the ones it can actually manufacture. It's not able to vacuum back up all of the serotonin that it releases every time there's an attempted synapse. And so this is why patients need to not just get on these drugs, they need to continue to see their doctor because relapse is coming their way. It might have helped for a while, but eventually that serotonin that neuron is going to be depleted, and now they're going to need higher doses, they're going to need multiple more medicines, and the individual ends up becoming what we call a psychiatric cripple, where they're needing 3 different medicines, 4 different medicines, and then we do the scores on them a year after taking all of that, and they still have severe depression, and now they're on all of these drugs. Temple University actually has demonstrated in well-designed studies to show that every time antidepressants are released in a new community, even in third world countries, because depression, I just came from Kenya, and depression is dramatically increasing in Kenya right now. One of the reasons why it's increasing, it was even in the headline newspaper, shock, depression increasing in Kenya due to smartphones. Over 50% of Kenyans now own a smartphone. And they're having depression, and so they're going to their doctor, and their doctor is prescribing these drugs. And the studies show that whenever these drugs are released, the rates of depression dramatically increase a year after their release. And so these are medicines that, and as a physician, I'm not saying I don't prescribe them. There may be times I do prescribe them, but I'm going to prescribe them for short-term situations while we take care of the underlying problem as to why there's not enough serotonin to begin with. Because we can do a lot better by helping the neuron manufacture more serotonin, or do a lot better by picking up more receptors. One of the ways of picking up more receptors is physical exercise. That's why it's not nutrition by itself. But there's things like exercise and getting more fit, that is going to help us. So let's take a look at some of the common nutrition hits. These are things that are going to cause us to have less synaptic activity. Not enough tryptophan. And we need not only tryptophan in our diet, but we need to get the tryptophan from our gut into our brain. And that's even a bigger problem because tryptophan is an amino acid that is turned into serotonin in the daytime. It's turned into melatonin at night, and it also can be turned into niacin. Now, what does serotonin help us with? Well, serotonin indirectly can help us with sleep because we need to make serotonin first before we can make melatonin at night. Melatonin is your fix and rejuvenate nighttime hormone. That's some of the things, the benefits that we get from sleep and also from darkness. This is why it's not good to have light 24 hours a day. You're not going to be able to make the melatonin even if your eyes are closed. And so that can be an issue. But serotonin is helping us with what besides indirectly sleep? It helps us with mood. Yes, it can help our mood to stay stable even when there's bad situations going on. What else can it help us with? Okay, it helps us prevent ourselves from going into panic when things are bad. When there's a panic attack, anxiety, those sorts of things, that's often a serotonin deficit. And it actually does help us to manage our emotions. There's some frontal lobe enhancing activity with serotonin. The problem with it is it's the least abundant amino acid in the diet, and so it's harder to get than it is other amino acids. But once we get the amino acid in the diet, we have to convert it to 5-HTP in the brain. And that is inhibited if we're really stressed out. So we might be getting enough tryptophan in our diet, but the stressful situation is prohibiting us from making serotonin. Insulin resistance is another thing that prevents us from making serotonin. What is another term for insulin resistance? Diabetes. Or what's another name if it's not diabetes? You can have insulin resistance without diabetes. It's called metabolic syndrome or prediabetes. This is why everyone that comes to our program, we're measuring their metabolism, we're measuring their insulin resistance because we might need to be able to get them have more, to allow them to make more serotonin by fixing that aspect of things. And it may not be so much a lack of tryptophan issue. If you're short in magnesium, you actually won't make serotonin or melatonin. This is why I was just talking in the car on the way over about some natural sleep aids, and magnesium is one of those because it can help you turn your tryptophan into serotonin and then melatonin at night. Vitamin B6 deficiency will also be a challenge in making serotonin, and also lack of light. And this is why depression is more common in what season in Oregon? It's more common in the wintertime. And of course, you have two things going on together that are challenging you as far as the light is concerned. What are those two things in the wintertime? Of course, there's not as much light. The sunrise and the sunset are the sunrise is far later and the sunset is far earlier, so you don't have as much daylight hours. But the other challenge is, in the wintertime, there tends to be, somebody mentioned fog. There tends to be a lot more clouds, more rain, and that does decrease the amount of lux in the ambient light, and that does decrease your ability to make serotonin. And also, the older we get, the less we tend to make. This is why when I was growing up, depression was known to be basically almost only a challenge once you got past middle age or at the middle age aspect of things. In fact, the lay term for it was not depression. The lay term for depression when I was growing up, because I know one of our neighbors started to suffer from it, and I was just a kid and I didn't know about it, but I realized something wasn't right with Mrs. McPherson, and I asked my family, what's going on with Mrs. McPherson? And they said, she's suffering from a midlife crisis. And that was the term that was used. We don't use that term much anymore because depression now occurs very frequently in teenagers, 25-year-olds. But the nice thing is, even if you become an old person, if you have everything else in balance, you're still going to be able to make enough serotonin for you. So we can actually make more than we need if we have all of these things in line. So once again, you can see the importance of not just nutrition, but the other factors that go along with nutrition to be able to get adequate amounts of serotonin produced. Studies show that tryptophan improves premenstrual dysphoria from ovulation to the third day of menstruation. It improves both depression and seasonal affective disorder. It also improves insomnia, and it can improve even obstructive sleep apnea. A lot of people are not aware of this treatment, but it's well documented to show that it helps sleep apnea. What's the most effective treatment for sleep apnea? A lot of people know about the CPAP mask, and that can be effective, but of course it's not just purely beneficial. There's some, there's some nuisances related to that CPAP mask. But even more highly effective for 80% of individuals, more highly effective than a CPAP mask is what? Weight loss, that's right. And so if you are overweight, losing weight down to your lean body weight will get rid of sleep apnea in about 80% of cases. But there's still 20% that may have issues, but this is where tryptophan can come in, and it can even help those that are overweight as well. But it also helps nicotine withdrawal and other drug withdrawals. This is one of the reasons why people that come to our program, they'll often talk about, wow, I didn't realize I was so afraid coming here because I knew I was going to have to get off of caffeine, and I was going to have to get off of marijuana, and I was going to have to get off my benzos, and I thought this is going to end my life coming to this program, and then they realize how easy it was. Wasn't near as difficult as they thought it would be, and partly due to the fact that they're now able to make serotonin a lot better. Particularly, we're giving them light therapy. In the wintertime, even at Weimar, the sun doesn't get up at 6 in the morning. So what are we doing for their light? We're using a medical-grade light box, a Philips light box, and now there's new technology that we've just invested in where there's actually light glasses. You actually put it on, and it's the same nanometer wavelength of the blue sky, and it actually will cause that serotonin level to come up to reset your body clock, and you can walk around and even exercise outdoors in the morning and get your blue light that way as if the sun is shining. And this, of course, produces some benefit, and it's easier, of course, to be able to get off of things like nicotine. And a lot of people think nicotine is addiction is becoming a thing of the past, but it is actually making a dramatic rise. In fact, I can't remember a program where we haven't had somebody that smoked their last cigarette at the Sacramento airport before we brought them over to our program. And so there's every program we have at least one person undergoing nicotine withdrawal. But now in the younger generation, it's really picked up. And vaping, and of course they're getting nicotine levels that are sometimes far higher than what are there in cigarettes. And so the addictive potential is even far greater, and we're in that crisis right now in this country with the vaping aspect of things. So when I was in medical school, I was told that whole milk was a great source of tryptophan, and you can see it's not a bad source, 46 milligrams per 100 grams. But there are higher sources: black-eyed peas, walnuts, almonds, sesame seeds. If you are not sensitive to gluten, gluten is actually a good source of tryptophan. So, I guess one of the disturbing things to me is that the most common diet ever in the United States, ever endorsed by mankind in the United States is actually a gluten-free diet. You want to guess how many Americans have tried a gluten-free diet? Half. 50% of Americans have attempted to be on a gluten-free diet and have actually gone gluten-free, partly due to the fact that they have gotten this idea because of the the labels and things that gluten must be universally bad. In fact, even your pastor the other day, he was talking about, he was in the grocery store and it had butter, and on the butter it said gluten-free in big letters. And there was a fellow shopper there, and he says, "Look, that butter is gluten-free." And the guy said, "Who knew?" And so we get this idea that gluten is universally bad. It is actually only bad for those that have celiac disease and only bad for those who might have a gluten sensitivity. And it turns out the majority of gluten-sensitive patients, by the way, celiac disease still only affects less than 1% of the population. As a GI doctor, I know this. We do the tests. I actually do the small bowel biopsies. And so celiac is less than 1%. It's about 0.8% of the population. If you have celiac disease, you do need to stay away from gluten. And we're very particular about that. But there are up to 4% of Americans who, in tests, will actually show some sensitivity to gluten. But it turns out the majority of those are actually not sensitive to the gluten. They're sensitive to the pesticides that tend to go with wheat. And so if they get the organic wheat, they actually find out they're not gluten sensitive like they thought they were. And gluten is sometimes called wheat meat, but wheat has been shown in so many trials to be universally healthy for the brain. One of the reasons is not just it helps us make serotonin, but it also helps us to make GABA-aminobutyric acid. And it is very high in glutamine. And glutamine is something that is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that can actually help us control our emotions. And so, there are ways of getting those things without gluten. And I should mention, I'm jumping ahead, and I don't know how much information I'm going to be able to give you today and still teach, because I need to finish my portion at 10:30 today, and we will have questions and answers after that time. But I will jump ahead and mention that some people, I did mention undermethylation yesterday. The undermethylators are the ones that tend to have obsessions, compulsions. They also tend to have the calm exterior and tense interior. They tend to not necessarily be the most social people to those they don't know. They're more, they're kind of on the edge sometimes of social anxiety, not in regards to the people they know. And they also tend to be very competitive and driven, and there's a whole lot of other things that go along with the personality of undermethylation. But if you are, another thing that wheat has that's beneficial is the amino acid methionine. And methionine is what we need in order to be able to methylate more adequately. And so some people that are on a plant-based diet, we've run into this, they're on a plant-based diet, and then they'll tell me they'll eat meat, and they actually feel better, and they think, I'm a person that actually needs meat. No, the problem is they're deficient in methionine. Meat does have methionine, but so does wheat. And so if they truly do have celiac disease, for an individual like this, we might actually give them methionine supplements, and it'll work far better than the risks of meat that we'll get into with the arachidonic acid and the pro-inflammatory aspects, plus the low antioxidants of meat. And so this is why, and the other thing that comes to mind, particularly with a biblical-based audience, which I assume most of you are here today, is that Christ himself called himself the what of life? if bread was universally bad, I don't think he would have told us that that's what he was. And so there are some healthy things in regards to bread, obviously. It's kind of our sustenance, where we get some good nutrition from, and the evidence in the scientific literature today is still very much there. By the way, I was in Brazil recently, and I was mentioning these types of things to the Brazilian audience, and one of the ladies there in the front row had read this book called Wheat Belly, where it told you about all the problems of wheat, as if wheat is the problem of obesity and things like that. It's not really wheat, it's what people are putting on the wheat, and those sorts of things. Wheat is not high caloric density per se. But it is true that if you leave a whole staple out of your diet and don't replace it, you will lose weight because you're dropping off of those calories. But anyway, she thought gluten was universally bad, and so she had had her whole family on a gluten-free diet for 4 years, and they were starting to get into trouble. I could see, even looking at them, they seemed a little emaciated and pale and things. And the next day when I came there, her husband came up to me and said, "I want to thank you to come all the way from Brazil, because last night, for the first time in 4 years, my wife baked bread, and we all had bread last night and this morning, and we're already feeling better." But gluten is not the top source of tryptophan. Pumpkin seeds are higher yet, and even tofu is higher yet, soybean cured. But it's not just the tryptophan in the diet. We want to get tryptophan into the brain. And let me explain a little bit of this slide. I know this has been put over into Keynote, and so we can't necessarily see all the things there, but I can at least demonstrate to you what's happening here. Tryptophan, well, let me get into the blood-brain barrier. Have you heard of the blood-brain barrier? The arteries change very significantly as soon as they get into our brain. They become like steel pipes, and it's very hard to get any large molecules past them into the brain. The reason why is because our brain, gets back to the cells. When our brain cells die, they can't be rejuvenated. You can't actually form new brain cells. And the oldest cells in our body are actually in our brain. In embryology, the first thing to get formed is your brain. Those stem cells are all going into the brain. And those brain neurons that were formed when you were a fetus, you actually still have. It's not like other organs in the skin where you're constantly turning over and making new cells. And so the oldest living cells in your body are actually the brain cells, and they're actually meant to last your entire life. I mentioned yesterday how the brain is also different. The brain is not meant to deteriorate with age. It's actually supposed to get better, and you're supposed to be wiser. And so one of the ways of keeping those cells alive is preventing toxins from getting into the brain and manipulating that brain or actually destroying it. And so that's one of the enigmas of alcohol, because alcohol is a small molecule. It passes through that blood-brain barrier, and it actually does destroy brain cells. That's another reason why we shouldn't consume alcohol. But tryptophan is bigger than alcohol. Tryptophan will not cross the blood-brain barrier without a carrier. And so when we need things like tryptophan, by design, there are carriers to carry this across. Now, if tryptophan easily diffused over, we would end up having our brain deteriorate over time, because there's other molecules that big that would be toxic to the brain. And so it's very helpful that we actually need a carrier to get tryptophan across. But there are 5 different amino acids, actually 6, including tryptophan, that are called large neutral amino acids. For those of you wanting to study biochemistry, there's an abbreviation of those called LNAA, large neutral amino acids. And they're large and neutral, meaning they're not acidic or basic, and they will only come across the blood-brain barrier with the same carrier. It's the same carrier that carries all 6 of these across. But remember, the one that is most in undersupply is tryptophan. So if you take a look at milk up there, and before I go too much for, well, I'll mention this part first, but also listen to the second part. Milk has 40% tryptophan and 60% of the competition. So when we consume milk, we're going to get more of the competitors going across, those other large neutral amino acids, than we will milk. But there's something else that's also needed for tryptophan to cross the blood-brain barrier. And you got a clue from that from a couple of slides ago when I talked about insulin sensitivity. It requires insulin, actually, to get tryptophan into the brain. And in order to have an insulin response to get the tryptophan into the brain, that's why we want to have tryptophan combined with carbs. When we eat it with carbs, we're going to be able to get that insulin response and get the tryptophan into the brain. Now, turkey, for instance, is high in tryptophan, but it is a carbohydrate-deficient food, a lot of fat, a lot of protein, plus it has a lot of those competitors, a lot more than what milk does. And so we'll get the tryptophan into muscles, we'll get it into enzymes that are not in the brain, but we're not going to be able to get the turkey tryptophan crossing appreciably into that blood-brain barrier. So if you take a look at those first two, milk and salmon, they have the same ratio, 40 to 60%. Which one do you think would get more tryptophan into the brain? Some are saying salmon. Most are saying salmon. And some are saying milk. The milk is correct. And salmon, even though it has the same ratio, salmon is once again a carbohydrate-deficient food. High in protein, high in fat, virtually no carbs. This is why in medical school I was told milk for tryptophan into the brain to be able to make serotonin and melatonin because it had those carbs. And they didn't tell me about salmon as a good way of getting that across. So now that you understand that principle, let's look at 3 that have even better ratios than milk: beef, chicken, and brown rice. Which one of those would get more tryptophan into the brain? Brown rice by far. So you get the idea. Black-eyed peas are higher yet. Soybeans, higher yet. Walnuts, higher yet. Pumpkin seeds, higher yet. Tofu is actually not at the top as far as the ratio is concerned. There's 2 foods where you'll get more tryptophan into the brain than tofu. And that is almonds, our number 2. And can anyone see what number 1 is? It's sesame seeds. And this is one of the advantages of hummus, which is made out of sesame seed butter, or tahini. This is actually a very good way of being able to get the substrate that you need to make serotonin. And it can make a significant difference. I know in our program, most people that have come to our program have never had tahini till they come to the program. More people have had hummus than they've had tahini, and our chef makes a very good hummus. But with tahini, the first time they try it, they're not sure they like it. It has kind of a bitter aftertaste. But I've noticed that after their 4th exposure, they can't get enough of it. They develop a taste for it very quickly, and they really start enjoying it. It might be some of the effects that they're noticing as well. In stress-prone subjects, high-carb, low-protein food prevents a deterioration of mood and performance under uncontrollable laboratory stress conditions. Our country is so much emphasizing protein, protein, protein all the time. But actually, we do better in making serotonin if we have lower protein and higher natural carbs. Now, by low protein, it doesn't mean insufficient protein. It doesn't mean deficient in protein. But most Americans are getting 4 to 5 times the amount of protein they need, and a lot of that is competition to tryptophan, and a lot of that is preventing that tryptophan from going into the brain. But this study showed High carb, low protein is going to prevent a mood and deterioration. Why is that? Stress-prone subjects have a higher risk of brain what? Serotonin deficiency. It's one of the reasons why they're more stress-prone, and this would be your undermethylator. Undermethylators are going to have a tendency for low serotonin activity. In subjects, higher natural carbs increase what? Personal control. So this is the management of their emotions, and it can also increase their self-control as well. Carbohydrates prevent a functional shortage of central serotonin during acute stress due to their potentiating effect on brain tryptophan. And this is why we don't advocate a low-carb diet. A lot of people are wanting to go to ketosis for their brain to improve, and there are some advantages of ketosis that we're going to get into. But the way the typical American does ketosis is talking about the paleo diet and those type of diets where it's very low in carbs and much higher in protein, and you are going to have a lot more serotonin challenges. And it's not really a sustainable diet. A low-carb diet is not a sustainable diet over time because of the effects it is going to have on brain chemistry. It's far better to get into ketosis, a way that we're going to be describing here later on. Another important amino acid is tyrosine. Tyrosine is incorporated in proteins of all life forms and is a precursor for the synthesis of thyroxine. What is thyroxine? That's your thyroid hormone. Is that important for brain health? Yes, it is, and physical health as well. Melanin and enkephalins and two neurotransmitters. What are the neurotransmitters that come out of tyrosine? Dopamine and norepinephrine. Now let's describe those a little bit. What does dopamine help us with? Well, more specifically, dopamine is going to help us with motivation. One of the hallmark symptoms of depression is apathy. This is when you wake up in the morning and you're not excited about the day. You wake up in the morning and you get up, but it's out of a sense of duty and responsibility and not interest. And that is a dopamine problem. You either have very low dopamine levels or you have destroyed a lot of your dopamine receptors. And for many people with severe depression, it's a combination of both of those. And there are certain lifestyle factors that will really diminish dopamine receptors. I think we talked about one of them yesterday in the morning service when we talked about Solomon. His dopamine levels would have gone, dopamine receptors would have gone way low as a result of this. But dopamine is important also for even wanting to learn. I would assume that most of you here today, unless you were told to come here by somebody else, most of you here today at least have some dopamine and dopamine receptors, because that is what we need for love of learning. If you have a love of learning, you actually do have some dopamine there. You do have some dopamine receptors, but those that don't have dopamine or dopamine receptors, they're not going to want to come to a meeting like this, even though they do have apathy. It's like, they don't want to learn. By the way, did anyone invite someone here today that you don't see? Okay, there's some hands going up. Those are the people that actually needed to be here more than you needed to be here to learn about these things and to put it into practice. But fortunately, if they do come to our program, they will actually get on things that start to improve their dopamine receptors and their dopamine levels, and their love of learning can go up considerably. Norepinephrine, what does that help us with? Well, epinephrine is your fight or flight. Epinephrine is adrenaline. Norepinephrine is a cousin to this, but you can get an idea a little bit for the fight or flight. The norepinephrine is going to give us energy, and it's also going to help us with memory and focus. And so tyrosine is also a potent antioxidant and also stimulates growth hormone production. And of course, this makes us anabolic. This is where we're building up our body and not deteriorating it over time. It may be of therapeutic benefit in improving depression, high blood pressure, stress, cognitive function, memory, Parkinson's disease, PKU, and narcolepsy. Looking around the room to see if we have anybody here with narcolepsy. What is narcolepsy? Does anyone know what that is? This is when you're wanting to stay awake, but you just can't. You sit down and you fall asleep. And narcolepsy often is very well treated with tyrosine. And interestingly, tyrosine helps high blood pressure. There are antidepressants that are trying to work with norepinephrine, these SNRIs. SNRIs are selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, so they're plugging the norepinephrine reuptake channels. Those are going to increase your blood pressure, and they can actually cause more hypertension. And so it's far better to get on something that's going to help you with both. And that's how things are when we do it naturally. It often helps us with a lot more things and we don't have the side effects. Those given tyrosine have significantly reduced headache. We will see some improvements in migraines and even tension headaches, stress, fatigue, muscle aches, and sleepiness compared to controls. Improvements were noted in mood, mental states, happiness, mental clarity, hostility, and tension, and cognitive tests. Math tests improved, coding map compass, pattern recognition in the tyrosine group. Now, to give you an idea of how effective sometimes this can be, we had a patient that we had declined. I know some of you have asked about relatives and others getting into the program, and I know the fear is that maybe they won't be accepted or not. And this individual had called and had been declined to come to the program. And her husband then took over and was calling for her, and our nurse was still declining her. And finally he says, I think Dr. Nedley's going to have more compassion than you. Can you please ask Dr. Nedley, run this up to him and run her case by and see if he won't accept her. And she says, okay, I'll do that. So she explained to me the situation and said, this lady has advanced Parkinson's disease. She's wheelchair bound. She can't feed herself. She can't dress herself. And of course, we don't have 24/7 nursing care. Ours is an ambulatory program. And furthermore, she's going to take up a spot of someone who can exercise. She can't exercise. And so when you have limited spots, you have to be more selective. And so I agreed with her that we couldn't accept her into the program. So her husband called back, and so at that time it was Leanne that was our nurse, and Leanne quoted me on the fact that she couldn't go in also because of not 24/7 nursing care, and he says, I will come with her. I am going to be her companion. I will feed her. I will dress her. I will do all of those things. Please let her into the program. And her doctor's referring her. Her doctor says she needs this program. So then our programs normally begin on Thursday. On Monday, I got a call from her neurologist at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland. And he said, please, will you let my patient into your program? And so they had gotten a hold of him and had him actually make a direct phone call to me. And, I said, well, you're her Parkinson's doctor, right? It was a neurologist. And he says, yeah. And so he says, I know that a lot of this is due to the Parkinson's. And I am treating her with, the most modern stuff that we can treat her with Parkinson's. So I'm not asking you to treat the Parkinson's. But a lot of her problems are depression. And I know she would benefit greatly from your program. So after that phone call, I called Leanne back, and of course the program was filled. But I said, if there's any cancellations, why don't you just move her to the top of the list? We'll let her in as long as the husband is still going to be here and provide the 24/7 care. So there was no cancellations until Thursday morning. And then someone canceled, and so Leanne called her right away, and they got on the first flight out of Baltimore and came to Sacramento. And our other staff had not been updated in regards to this change in situation. And so our director out in California goes into a panic mode when he sees this wheelchair-driven lady with advanced Parkinson's coming to our depression and anxiety recovery program. And I'm seeing another patient, and I get a knock on the door from the director, and the director comes in and says, "Do you know who just pulled up? They came all the way from the East Coast. She can't feed herself. She can't dress herself. How in the world did we let this person into the program?" And she was thinking that we had just totally destroyed protocol and all of those things. And I said, "Well, you know, she's not officially in until she sees me, but let's just see what happens after she sees me." So we moved things around so I could see her right away after that patient. And I wanted to see what her husband would say. And the husband says, "I am going to do everything for her. I'm going to feed her. I'm going to dress her. I'm going to do all of these things. Thank you so much for letting her into the program. We're so grateful." And he was just moved at the fact that he was even there. And so after that visit, I told her, I said, "You know, you have problems making dopamine. That's what Parkinson's is a dopamine problem, not really brain-wide, but in the brain stem itself. And it's from toxins destroying the dopamine-producing cells. It's once again toxins getting in and destroying these cells that prevent the dopamine from being made." And I said, "You know, for the cells that can make the dopamine, I'd like to kind of saturate it with tyrosine, so I'm going to put you on some high-dose tyrosine supplements, and it may not do much, but let's just see what can happen, so at least we can look at this." And then I looked at all the other things affecting her depression and put her on the regimen that would be best for her. And she took the tyrosine that night, she took it that morning, and I wasn't there that morning, but our staff saw it. It came time for the breakfast, which is about 7:15, so at 7 she's getting ready. He had dressed her in things, and now she actually gets up out of the wheelchair and starts walking uphill to the cafeteria. And her husband says, "Honey, don't. You're going to fall. Let me help you." And she says, "Get out of my way." And she's walking now for the first time in quite a while. And you can imagine that she had a great program. In fact, her husband still sends us a gift every 6 months or so to thank us for the benefit. Now, we didn't cure the Parkinson's. I don't want you to get an idea that the Parkinson's was cured. But if tyrosine can do that for a Parkinson's patient, what do you think it can do with someone else that has issues with apathy or also issues with attention deficit? Because a lot of times with the attention deficit disorder, these Adderall patients, or if they're on Vyvanse or amphetamines or things of that nature, the tyrosine can be a nice substitute so that they can still have focus and concentration without getting into the addictive aspects of things. So a little different set of foods that are high in tyrosine. Mustard greens, lamb's quarters, tomatoes. Tofu comes out pretty good in tyrosine. Edamame is even better. What is edamame? That's your green soybeans. So we serve those green soybeans at Weimar. Eggs, almonds, oats, sunflower seeds. Peanuts are actually up there near the top as far as tyrosine. And pumpkin and squash seeds are actually even higher yet. I'm staying at your pastor's house, and yesterday she introduced me to a butter that has pumpkin seeds and almonds and flax seeds and 5 different seeds, chia's in there too, I believe, and some cashews. So 5-in-1 butter that they have at Costco's of all places. So I had that on my waffles this morning, and I think it's given me some energy here this morning. So, but tyrosine has less competitors, but it is also large enough that it needs a carrier to get into the brain. And there are 3 competitors that compete with it. These are the foods that are in the top of the list as far as less competition. Sweet potatoes, flaxseed, chia seeds, We really shouldn't have beef on the list, although beef, we were just looking at the top 10 as far as the ratios. Beef has a better ratio. But once again, tyrosine is a ditto to tryptophan. We need carbs. It's an insulin response to get tyrosine across. And so beef would not be your best source. Tofu, pumpkin seeds are actually not at the top as far as the ratio. Soybeans are higher yet. Spirulina is higher yet, but the two highest are watermelon and mustard greens. Now, how does this come into play? We had an individual come through our program that had anxiety and some depression, but he was primarily anxiety. And he was, of course, ours is a caffeine-free program. We don't want to suppress that frontal lobe. And of course, caffeine and anxiety go hand in hand. And so he was doing a lot better without the caffeine. But then as he was getting close to going home, he said, Dr. Nedley, I'm worried because I make my living driving a truck for an oil company that produces parts for oil drilling, and sometimes I get a call right when I'm ready to go home at 5 p.m. that I need to deliver this piece to Albuquerque, New Mexico, because they've got 100 people out there drilling, and now they're out, they've had broken pieces or things like that, and so they call and they pay for this overnight shipping, and it's me that actually ships it to them so that these men don't have to sit around for a whole day being paid, 100 of them. And so he says, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this without caffeine. And I said, once you're caffeine free for 2 weeks, you will actually be able to stay awake with tyrosine foods if you're eating them in the evening. So he said, so what foods would that be? I said, well, you have a choice, mustard greens or watermelon. What do you think he chose? He chose watermelon. And he said it works like a charm. He says, unlike the caffeine, it would keep him awake, but it made him feel wired. He didn't necessarily like the effect. And of course, it fueled the anxiety as well. But he said, with the watermelon, I stay awake, and I can stay awake all night. And he says, I actually feel good, and I can deliver that part to Albuquerque, and it does not fuel at all the anxiety part of things. Now, if he would have been a diabetic, I wouldn't have given him a choice. It would have been mustard greens and not watermelon. So don't chow down on high protein sources to boost either tyrosine or tryptophan. Emphasize carbohydrate-rich plant sources of nutrition. Of course, watermelon is nice and high in those carbohydrates, and it really helps. Now, for those of you who are on caffeine, watermelon's not going to necessarily keep you awake. That's why you have to have withdrawal from the caffeine. But once you're caffeine-free, you don't want to have watermelon in the evening. That's more of a morning food or a lunchtime food, but not a late in the evening food because it'll start delaying your circadian rhythms. Another cause of depression and or anxiety are low folate levels. Such depression has been shown unresponsive to medicine. So, if you're short in tryptophan or tyrosine, you can get on medicine that will seem to help you for a while. These are the ones that are plugging these vacuum cleaners, and so people are getting a response. But with folate deficiency, they won't get any response with those medicines. And folate is very important in producing 3 different neurotransmitters. And the U.S. government says it's undersupplied in the typical American's diet, which is true. We need 400 micrograms for optimal physical health. But they're only looking at the physical health side of things. For optimal mental health, it's better to have 1,000 micrograms of folate. And you can see this is a double serving of steak, 16 micrograms. You'd have to eat so much steak to get 1,000 that you might actually die that day. And so, fortunately, there are a lot better sources of folate. Parsnips, pineapple, orange juice, peanuts, mustard greens and again, spinach is higher than mustard greens. Navy beans are quite high in folate. Okra is even higher yet. Do you grow okra up here in Oregon? No. And some say yes. Very rare to have okra. Yeah, in Oklahoma, where I came from, it was grown in abundance. I think that's where it got its okay at the beginning from. Okay raw. And lentils, 831 micrograms of folate. And the highest source of folate, black-eyed peas. 1 cup will give you all you need for the day, 1,057 micrograms. And we have a grower in the Sacramento Valley that grows organic black-eyed peas. They're very good, have a nice, naturally sweet taste, and we use it in abundance in our program. Atherosclerosis, causing heart disease or mini strokes, can also lead to depression and anxiety due to lack of circulation in the brain. But high cholesterol in and of itself can do it. Patients with major depression tend to have significantly higher cholesterol levels than healthy adults. Depressed patients with elevated cholesterol have a poorer prognosis for treatment response. Lowering cholesterol levels improves depression and mood, and also improves what? Impulsivity. By the way, that's one of the enigmas of the vacuum cleaner pluggers. The vacuum cleaner pluggers can improve mood, but they worsen impulsivity. And that's why they have big black box warnings on them. You know what those black box warnings say can happen when these people start taking these medicines? And this is the enigma of, the benefits versus the risks in physicians prescribing these drugs. The black box warning says it will increase their risk of suicide when they first start taking it, because suicide is often an impulsive act. And it will worsen their impulsivity before it improves their mood. Now, after about a month of taking it, it balances out enough so it doesn't lower the risk of suicide, but it keeps it about neutral because the mood increase is somewhat balanced with the worsened impulsivity. Another problem with these drugs is a lot of people like them that have crying spells because they're feeling their emotions. But when you start plugging the vacuum cleaners, you become a little more numb in your emotions. And of course, that produces also its risk. We had a lady come to our program that started to have depression due to some behaviors of her husband. And her husband got into a gambling addiction. And there were some other factors as well. But a doctor, to handle the depression that she was having, put her on SSRIs. The SSRIs caused an I don't care attitude. And that I don't care attitude put no brakes on her husband. And her husband ended up spending the entire retirement and even had to go into the mortgage of the house in order to fund his gambling addiction. And by the time she realized all its effects, it's like, I should have had some emotions. I think if I'd had emotions, I would have done something and might have been able to stop all of this. And so, once again, it's far better to get things that are going to have benefits without the side effects. But notice, this is one of the things that can benefit. If you have high cholesterol, and we measure everyone's cholesterol that comes through the program, but if you have high cholesterol and you get it lowered, it's going to improve depression and mood and improve the impulsivity. And it won't cause a numbness to emotions per se. So let's take a look at cholesterol in foods. Fruits, grains, nuts, vegetables. And sorry, this didn't translate over from PowerPoint to Keynote very well, but if it did, those zeros would all be lined up. None of plant foods do not have cholesterol. Non-fat skim milk has 4 milligrams, 2% milk 18, whole milk 33 milligrams. Egg white is an exception to the animal product rule, no cholesterol. Mayonnaise 8 milligrams, ice cream 29, butter 31. Sorry, you can't see the number behind the egg. That's 213 milligrams of cholesterol. Egg yolks are very loaded with cholesterol. A lot of people think tuna is part of the plant kingdom and has no cholesterol, but tuna is actually part of the animal kingdom. It has a liver, and it does have cholesterol, and if you feed fish to a plant-based vegetarian, their cholesterols invariably go up. Clams 57, crab 64. A lot of people think if I just scrape the fat and the skin off the chicken, it'll be no cholesterol chicken. But even if you scrape the fat and the skin off, it's 73 milligrams. pork is 76, beef 80, but if you don't scrape the fat and the skin off, 82 milligrams. Chicken actually has higher cholesterol than red meat. A lot of people are not aware of that. And a lot of people think seafood is where the advantages are. In fact, in Oklahoma, hopefully not so much in Oregon, but in Oklahoma, we ran into a lot of people that told me they were on a seafood diet. And of course, I would ask them what that meant, and they said, well, when I see food, I eat it. And I never responded back with some of the thoughts that went through my head, but often I thought, you didn't need to tell me that, I could tell just by looking. But sardines, 120 milligrams of cholesterol, even higher yet. Shrimp, that's 165 milligrams. Kidney, 329. So the organ meats are loaded. Liver, that's 410 milligrams. Caviar, 500 milligrams. And if you see anyone feasting on beef brains, you have to wonder about their intentions. 1 3-ounce serving, 1,697 milligrams of cholesterol. Now, we also know that cholesterol, although it raises blood cholesterol, cholesterol in the diet can have even more damage than just the raising of the blood cholesterol. In fact, earlier, Jeremiah Stamler indicated that dietary cholesterol is an independent risk factor no matter what your cholesterol is for the development of atherosclerosis. So high cholesterol is an independent risk factor as well, but if your liver doesn't make as much, a lot of people think they can get by with eating all these cholesterol foods, but it actually is an independent risk factor. And Dr. Bruce Taylor was the one who discovered, actually it's kind of interesting how he discovered this. This is due to having medical students. Medical students came to him and said, we need to do a study before they'll let us graduate from medical school. A lot of medical schools, you have to do a study. It doesn't need to be publishable, but at least it has to do a study so they can understand how it's done and the statistics and all of that. And so this group of medical students, 4 of them were allowed to work together on a study. And they said, you know, it has to be something that hasn't been done before. And so we've looked at the medical literature, and no one has ever fed pure cholesterol to rabbits and monkeys. We'd like to feed pure cholesterol to rabbits and monkeys and see what happens to them. And Dr. Taylor says, well, why are you coming to me for that? And they said, well, because you're the cholesterol researcher, and we thought you might have some. Do you have any? And he says, yeah, I've got lots of cholesterol. It's pure cholesterol. It's been there for a while, but you go ahead and use it. And so they fed pure cholesterol to rabbits and monkeys, and within a few weeks, those rabbits and monkeys started to have strokes, heart attacks, all sorts of vascular problems. And they wrote up their study and their data, and they put it all together, and they were through. But Bruce Taylor, when he looked at that data, he thought, you know, cholesterol is bad, but it shouldn't have been that bad. Just a few weeks, heart attacks and strokes in these poor rabbits and monkeys. And then he began to think of the cholesterol he had given them. The cholesterol had been exposed to the air because the lid had been off. It had become discolored. When cholesterol is oxidized, it actually starts to turn a darker color instead of a clear, waxy substance. And he thought, I wonder what would happen if we fed pure cholesterol that's never been exposed to the air to rabbits and monkeys. And so medical students were gone, but he now did that study. And he found out pure cholesterol that's never been exposed to the air, it's non-oxidized, has no damage to the blood vessels. Weeks later, blood vessels were clean. And then he thought, okay, people don't eat just pure cholesterol, they're eating foods. So let's take a look at the foods that are the most damaging. So he would feed just this food for a day to a monkey, and then he would go in 24 hours later and count the dead cells in their aorta. And he found out the most damaging cholesterol, the ones that are the most oxidized and produce the most damage. Number one damaging cholesterol he found were custards. Now, what are custards? Milk eggs and sugar. So you're mixing up eggs, this high cholesterol food, in a sugar environment, and you're heavily oxidizing it. What's the most commonly consumed custard in America? Good old-fashioned ice cream. And this is why one of our board members at Weimar has come out with 32 flavors, one more than Baskin-Robbins, of ice cream. And his ice cream on the street gets rated higher than regular ice cream. People will prefer it. A lot more people prefer his ice cream than the regular ice cream. And he was frustrated because it didn't have any milk in it, didn't have any eggs, no animal products, but yet very creamy. He made it, the base of all 32 flavors is oats. By smashing the oats, you can make them very creamy, and no cholesterol and no oxidized cholesterol. He was frustrated because in America you can't call it ice cream unless it comes from cow's milk. And even if it comes from goat's milk, you can't call it ice cream because of these trademarks. And so he finally found the name. It's called We Can't Say It's Ice Cream. And they did allow him to call it that, and a nice substitute. Second most damaging, pancake mix. This was Aunt Jemima's pancakes he was looking at. Pancakes what are they made out of primarily? Yeah, you're powdering up eggs and flour together, and the powdering up of the eggs heavily oxidizes it. And this is one of the reasons my wife designed a book. You'll see why here in a little bit, but breakfast, as you'll find out, is the most important meal of the day for mental health. And a lot of people don't know how to cook breakfast tastefully and healthfully and adequate with the tryptophan and the tyrosine and all of those things. So she wrote a cookbook called Brighten Up Breakfast, and it has 4 different types of recipes there. They're all great pancakes and no oxidized cholesterol in it, and plenty of the good nutrients. Third most damaging was Parmesan cheese, and that was tied with lard. That's not a misprint. Both of them were tied with the third most damaging. And Parmesan cheese, again, you're powdering up the cheese and heavily oxidizing it. But this study also explained something earlier of a study that had been done in Louisiana that we didn't quite figure out until Dr. Taylor's work. Is Louisiana known for its healthy food? No. Louisiana is known to have possibly the most unhealthy food of all 50 states. The Cajun food is very unhealthy, lots of fast food restaurants there. And the mothers in Louisiana, the way they eat, they actually have higher cholesterol in their human breast milk than cow's milk. At least the typical mother there in Louisiana. And so they did a study because they thought it would come out differently, but they took a look at infants consuming cow's milk versus human breast milk. And it's a little bit morbid on how they did this study because they did it when infants died of unrelated causes to disease. In other words, if they got into an auto accident and died, if they got into sudden infant death syndrome and died, or something like that. And so their arteries were looked into based on their diet. And one group had clean arteries, and another group of infants actually began to have the fatty streaks of atherosclerosis, already damage to their arteries in infancy. Which group do you think had more of the damage? Those consuming human breast milk or those consuming cow's milk? Well, if human breast milk is higher in cholesterol, you might think it was human breast milk. But actually, those consuming human breast milk, even though their cholesterol level was high from unhealthy mothers, clean vessels. Those consuming cow's milk actually had the fatty streaks of atherosclerosis. What was the difference? The difference is the way the infants drink human breast milk, it's directly from the nipple, it's not exposed to the air, and it's not oxidized. And so that's why those vessels were clean. So the best way for you to drink your cow's milk? Go down to the barn and get it straight. Interestingly, we were told years ago, especially harmful are the custards and puddings in which milk, eggs, and sugar are the chief ingredients. Free use of milk and sugar together should be avoided. And then antioxidants are also healthy for the brain. It was observed that patients with generalized anxiety disorder and depression had significantly lower blood levels of antioxidants in comparison to healthy controls. After dietary supplementation of these vitamins for a period of 6 weeks, a significant reduction in anxiety and depression scores of patients were observed. What are the antioxidant vitamins? Anyone want to name them? C is an antioxidant vitamin. E is an antioxidant vitamin. A is another antioxidant vitamin, the A, C, and E. And being on antioxidant vitamins can be helpful, but the power of whole plant foods exceeds that of their component parts. In other words, 1 cup of kale has 50 milligrams of vitamin C and 13 units of vitamin E. But the antioxidant potential of 1 cup of kale is equal to 800 milligrams of vitamin C and 1,100 units of vitamin E. That means it's a lot better to eat your kale than it is to take A, C, and E from vitamin pills or vitamin pill areas. And so the Human Nutrition Laboratory in Baltimore, Maryland recently came out with the top 10 antioxidant vegetables. These are the ones that have the most potent antioxidants in the foods themselves. Number 10, eggplant. Number 9, corn. Number 8, onion. Number 7, red bell peppers. Number 6, beets. Beets are showing up in a whole lot of studies as being very healthy, partly due to its very high antioxidant potential. Number 5, broccoli. Broccoli has some additional advantages of the cruciferous vegetables, very high in antioxidants. Number 4, Brussels sprouts. And if you don't like Brussels sprouts, you have to come to Weimar Institute, because the way they make Brussels sprouts at Weimar, we haven't found a single individual that does not like them. Number 3, what is that? Spinach. Number 2, what is that? Kale is number 2. Anyone want to guess what the number 1 antioxidant vegetable is? Number 1 is garlic. And this is the advantage of being married to a Romanian like I am. Every entree starts out with 4 cloves of garlic, it seems. Garlic has a lot of other beneficial properties as well. The top 10 antioxidant fruits. Grapefruit is number 10. Kiwi is number 9. Number 8, cherries. Number 6, red grapes. The bioflavonoids, resveratrol, a lot of those, even some anthocyanins in red grapes. Oranges are actually up there in the, I think that's number 6. Number 5, plums. Plums are a humble fruit, but they're loaded with antioxidants. Number 4 are raspberries. Number 3, strawberries. Number 2, blackberries. You have a lot of blackberries in Oregon, don't you? Yep. I think they even grow wild up here a lot, don't they? Yeah, those wild blackberries. And the number 1 antioxidant fruit, blueberries, number 1. And we talked about those anthocyanins yesterday in regards to memory. And so these are very important. And notice the top 4 are actually berries. The berries are quite loaded in the antioxidants. And then randomized controlled trials have shown a plant-based diet associated with healthy mood states will be able to lower the depression scores by 50% in a typical person just by getting arachidonic acid out of the diet. Arachidonic acid is a pro-inflammatory mediator that's present in meat, fish, and eggs. It's not present in milk or plant foods, and of course the plant foods are going to have higher antioxidants and higher amounts of tryptophan, tyrosine to get across, so significant advantages. Males and females drop by 50% alone. Why were vegetarians significantly less depressed, anxious, and stressed than even healthy meat eaters in the study? Negligible arachidonic acid intake may explain the favorable mood profile we observed with vegetarian diets. And then there may be some things such as herbal preparations that we might utilize to help people in some specific ways. Does anyone recognize this flower? It's not passion flower, but a good guess. There's something in this flower that has been shown to be highly effective in treating depression and anxiety. And it's the red stems there. Saffron, that's right, saffron. 30 milligrams daily of saffron is equivalent to Prozac daily in 6 weeks in improving depression scales, but no sexual side effects with the saffron, unlike the Prozac. It also has been shown to improve premenstrual syndrome, and even smelling it has been shown to be helpful. It also worked as well as the leading drug in treating Alzheimer's without the side effects. And so saffron is very helpful in treating dementia and arresting the progression of it. It seems to inhibit the amyloid beta protein development. And then there's another preparation that we've utilized extensively and have shown some significant benefit called Selexon. Selexon, placed in capsules, has been utilized for generalized anxiety disorder, and 80 milligrams daily has been shown to be beneficial. Relief of generalized anxiety disorder in 76%, with over double improvement compared with placebo. And it also improves sleep quality, even though it's not a sedative, because it's getting rid of the anxiety and no frontal lobe suppression. 6-week trial and improved anxiolytic effect was comparable to the improvement noticed with lorazepam. Now, lorazepam is one of those benzos that's used for anxiety, but it's a frontal lobe suppressant. You develop tolerance. It's highly addictive. But the Selexon, also called Lavella, it comes in a preparation that's purified. Actually, the Lavella gives you an idea where it comes from. Anyone want to guess where it comes from? Lavender, that's right. The lavender oil is purified into Selexon. And since lavender oil showed no sedative effects in our study, has no potential for drug abuse, Selexon appears to be an effective and well-tolerated alternative to benzos for the amelioration of generalized anxiety. And for those that are on benzos, we'll actually give them some Lavella to be able to help get them on a weaning program and be able to start getting off. Yes, question? It's not that expensive. I'm pretty sure, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure we have some out there on the counter. I know yesterday we didn't have any supplements, and my wife packed things, and we'd like to, if we're going to talk about supplements, we'd like to have them potentially available. And she said, it's the last black suitcase I put in your airplane. She packed my airplane because I didn't have time to pack it before I left Friday morning for Oakland. And we couldn't find that black suitcase last night, but it turns out it was in the car, and so we found it this morning. And I think if you go out to the table, you'll be able to find some of those supplements. But it's not that expensive. It's going to be cheaper than a lot of alternatives without the side effects. The other thing they've noticed with Lavella, we've used it for test anxiety. You know, there are people that have anxiety, particularly when it comes to test time. And so they've used lorazepam for that too. And lorazepam has been shown to help get rid of test anxiety, but it worsens your test scores. Why does it do that? Because it's a frontal lobe suppressant. Lavella gets rid of the anxiety, but it does not suppress the frontal lobe, so the test scores actually go up. So those who do poorly due to test anxiety, they'll actually do far better by taking Lavella prior to the test, which is a kind of a nice feature for those at Weimar who may be struggling for something like that. Common mediator that affects of B12 and folate deficiency is reduced SAM-E. This is a table, and let's see if I can get to... I'm not quite as good as your pastor at this pointer. Can't even get it on the screen. Sorry. But as you notice, methylation. If someone is an undermethylator, they're going to have problems in that methyl donation of making those 3 neurotransmitters. That's dopamine, 5-hydroxytryptophan, which is serotonin, and norepinephrine. We need to add a methyl group to all of those. And for someone who's an undermethylator, if their homocysteines are not too high, this is why we have to measure all of these things in the bloodstream when people come to us. We're going to be measuring all of these different biochemicals. If the homocysteine is not backed up and too high, what will be helpful, and often far more helpful than any SSRIs or any of those SNRIs, is actually to give them S-adenosylmethionine itself in a supplement. It's something that is found in nature, but we can give it in a supplement, and SAMe will build up over time and will be far more effective without worsening the impulsivity, and will help a lot with this anxiety and those sorts of things. So this is why it's good for us to know what's going on in the brain. There are individuals who are actually overmethylators. Overmethylators have a far different personality. They're individuals who are, they're not social phobes. They're very socialites. They tend to be very empathetic by nature because they already have enough serotonin activity. They tend to also be creative. They're more artistic, but they're not so competitive. They don't have to get an A. They don't have to win the game, that sort of thing. And overmethylators can also suffer from depression and anxiety. They can also almost become histrionic at times under stress. And these individuals will actually respond to folate. Folate actually clears up those channels in their reuptake promoters, so we might actually give them folate supplements. Everyone needs folate. You need folate even to methylate adequately, but if you get even an abundance of folate, it will actually help in regards to overmethylation. So those are things, again, that we would look at. Well, I saw that I've gone a little bit over, so let me hurry through a couple of these slides, then we'll get to questions. Excess calories can reduce synaptic plasticity and increase the vulnerability of cells to damage by causing free radical formation that surpasses the buffering capacity of the cell. Moderate caloric restriction should thus protect the brain by reducing oxidative damage to cellular proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Many of the beneficial effects of caloric restriction and fasting appear to be mediated by the nervous system. Intermittent fasting results in increased production of BDNF, which increases the resistance of neurons in the brain to dysfunction and degeneration. And if you fast for over 12 hours, no caloric intake, metabolism of fat stores release fatty acids called what? Ketones to be produced, which improve memory, learning, and reduce neurodegeneration. This is the advantage of ketosis. And if you go 17 hours, you'll even produce a lot more. And so for a lot of people, if they're able to do this, one of the most brain-preserving diets you can be on is one where you're fasting every day. You eat a good breakfast and you eat a good lunch, but you don't eat a supper. It's called time-restricted feeding. It's been well studied now in the scientific literature, and it's an easy way to maintain your weight without getting obese. And it also actually helps turn on the positive neuroplasticity switches. The world doesn't seem to know how to get you to ketosis unless they take you off carbs. So this is why the paleo diet has some attraction, because people are trying to get ketosis, but the paleo diet, you're going to have arachidonic acid, you're not going to have as much antioxidants, you're not going to get enough tryptophan and tyrosine into the bloodstream. But this is a win-win, because if you're on a plant-based diet with those healthy things, breakfast and lunch, and then do a fast in the evening, what a difference it can make as far as your brain biochemistry. So once again, BDNF goes up as little as 12-hour fast, goes up even more at 17 hours. BDNF is kind of a brain fertilizer that helps us. And then the advantages to eating breakfast. A lot of people, if they skip a meal, they're doing a 17-hour fast and they're starting to eat at 1 in the afternoon or something. That's an issue because studies have shown the meal to skip is supper, not breakfast. Breakfast, you'll have better cognitive performance, better scholastic scores, improved creativity, and you have more depression when you skip breakfast. And breakfast eaters perform better on tests, spatial orientation tests, and cognitive tests, and are calmer at the end of testing. I'll close. I think this is my second to the last slide. This is a prestigious journal in Europe called Lancet Psychiatry. And notice the quotes from this journal that reviewed nutrition and mental health. Now is the time for the recognition of the importance of what? Nutrition and what else? Nutrient supplementation in psychiatry. Nutritional medicine should now be considered as a what? Mainstream element of psychiatric practice. So if your psychiatrist is not talking nutrition or potential supplementation, they are no longer mainstream. They are out of line of the scientific data that has been accumulated. And these are things that can produce powerful effects and ones that can really produce freedom. I'll close with the French philosopher Denis Diderot. He said back in the 19th century, doctors are always working to preserve our health and cooks to destroy it, but the latter are often the more successful. It doesn't have to be that way if we retrain the cooks. If we retrain the cooks to have healthy food and tasty food, there's no reason to go back to the other way of doing things. And that's why I would also encourage you to look at the great cookbook that's out there so that we can have healthy food that is tasty. And so, Carrie, I will turn it over to you. Stay by. We are going to have questions, and I know this will help to clarify a number of things. And while they're doing that, if you could upload the questions, I'm probably going to address this, but I do have another presentation there, and if you could upload that second presentation, we can get to some of the more genetic things in the questions.
So yes, thank you so much, Dr. Neil Nedley. That was awesome seminar this weekend. We really appreciated it. Can you hear me okay? All righty. So we do have a few more things. I have a few acknowledgments, and then we are going to have an offertory, and then we are going to have the drawing for the prizes. If you attended all 3 sessions, your name has gone into a hat, so to speak, and you'll qualify for possibility of your name to be drawn for one of our prizes. And then we will finish after that with the question and answer. A little over a year ago, this whole thing here was just a little bit of a dream. Actually, I was working with my mentor, and we said, what could we work on? Emotional EQ. And I was like, okay. And then we started thinking, wouldn't it be great if? What if? And then the if turned into a little bit more of, let's see what we could do. And so the if turned into reality, and that's why we're here today. It takes a village to make something like this happen. And so this is like my little mini Academy Award presentation thank you thing. If you've ever seen those, they try to do it really, really fast. So that's what I'm going to try to do here. It does take a village, and there's been a lot of people that have gone into this whole thing happening. And so I do want to acknowledge those people. I do want to thank you to the Birds for hosting Dr. Nedley this weekend, and also for being a little bit of my rock throughout this process. And then the Hallmark team for all of your work, the deacons and everything that you have done, Key Morse for everything she's done on the back end to make this happen. Rosie's team, was that a fantastic lunch yesterday? Or what? Oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like it. It was great. And Growing and Going also helped out with that. The special music, we appreciated that very much yesterday, and with both the Jubilant and with Kayla. And our parking attendants, Ben and Brian. If I forget anybody, please forgive me. Our greeters, you guys did a great job with the sunshine on your face, getting people in the door and getting them over to the registration desk and that kind of thing. Speaking of the registration, we appreciate all of you that worked at registration, especially appreciate Carrie. Carrie with a K, as we say, she kind of headed that whole thing up. And then the booth people, Michael, Rosie, Donna, Karen, everybody else that's working it today. Jenny and Ruth are out there today, and Sandy also. Also thank the Treasury and the board for electing to have this happen. And then finally, I want to acknowledge especially the committee that was working behind the scenes on this for about the last 6 months to make it happen. I want to thank Bob, who's sitting right here and who has been the MC for this event, and also the voice of reason within our committee. I want to thank Chuck, who was always steering us in the right direction. I want to thank Rosie, who is knowledgeable and an expert, very much an expert at hosting this kind of an event. Michael, for his innovation and his excitement in whatever he does. Jennifer, I hope you're here today, Jennifer. I haven't seen you, but if you're out there watching, she is outstanding, and she's the person that did all our marketing and our advertising and getting this information out to the public. I think she did a great job based on the results of the amount of people that have been here, so we really, really thank her for that. And then finally, Carrie with a K, who's been kind of my right-hand woman throughout this whole thing. Appreciate every one of you. Alex and Ken at the booth, we appreciate you folks too for all of your hard work. But mostly I want to thank and just let him know so much again how much we appreciate Dr. Neil Nedley taking time out of his busy schedule to be here in our little Grants Pass and visit with us. Thank you so much. Gotta help me get back down too. Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie, for all that you have done to help make this event happen as well. I know you've worked very hard in the last several weeks and months to make this happen. There's a couple more things that we're going to do here, and we're definitely going to take some time for Dr. Nedley to answer your questions. But I do want to alert you to the fact that because of Dr. Nedley's schedule and maybe some other factors, the booth that we have out in the foyer where there's resources, books, workbooks, DVDs, as well as I think the supplements that Dr. Nedley alluded to. If you want to take advantage of those resources, the booth is going to be closing down right around 11 o'clock. So just keep that in mind. If you don't have questions for Dr. Nedley, but you do want to take advantage of the resources, 11 o'clock. Okay, so you heard that. No Lavella, but there are other supplements and definitely other resources that you can take advantage of. At this time, what I'd like to do, because this has been a free event, obviously no charge to attend, we wanted to make sure that everybody who wanted to be here could be here, that cost would not be an issue for anyone. But the reality is that there are actually a number of costs associated with putting an event on of this type. It's not cheap or inexpensive to do this. It does cost money. The church has incurred considerable expense to make this possible and make it possible for Dr. Nedley to be here this weekend. We'd like to take up an offering specifically for the church's fund for special events like this one, and just to make sure that not only can we cover many of our costs associated with this, but be able to put on future events of this type. If the deacons would please come forward, we're going to take up an offering at this time. Now let's go ahead and pray right now. Our loving Father in heaven, we thank you. Thank you that there is so much that is a part of your design for our bodies, and that you have made it possible for Dr. Nedley to be here this weekend and share some of the insights that he has learned over the years, both in his education, in his clinical practice, in the programs that he's doing for depression and anxiety and other issues that really have to do with the mind that you have so wonderfully and you've made so wonderfully and fearfully. And Lord, we just thank you for that. We thank you for Dr. Nedley and his commitment and his ministries. And Lord, we just thank you that we could put on this event this weekend. And we look forward to doing more events like this. And we just thank you now for the opportunity to give to make events of this type possible. And Lord, I pray that all these monies could be used according to your purposes. Thank you for the gifts that are given and for each giver as well. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Oh, just to explain in terms of the offering, if it is a tax-deductible donation, if you want to make out a check, you can also include that in one of the tithe and offering envelopes. Just mark the envelope Neil Nedley or just NN, and we'll know the purpose for which you wanted to give that gift. Thank you.
This is not zero drop foot shape wear. This is gifts for you all. Now, how many of you sitting here have attended all 3 sessions? Raise your hand. Raise them like you're Pentecostal. Shake it all around. And now I've got Vanna here. And the first person is Steve McKellop. Steve McKellop, are you here right now? Steve McKellop. Is this Steve? All right. We're giving you the lost art of thinking. All right. Thank you. All right. And if you can't make it up here, we're going to actually allow our deacons to bring it to you as well if you'd like. Rima Roberts. Rima, are you here? Rima. Is Rima here? Yes, she is. All right. We are going to brighten up your breakfast. And by the way, all of these resources are available out at the table. So if you don't win, straight to the back, Dallas, there. Rima, raise your hand. Rima, raise your hand. There you go. All righty. All right. We've got another wonderful gift here. Yes.
Harry Hansen.
Harry Hansen. Harry, are you here? Harry. Is Harry here? Huh? His wife is? I don't know if we should let his wife claim it for him, do you? The Lost Art of Thinking. You can pass that on to her. Very good. And we've got one more wonderful gift here. And actually, we got more than one more. We got several more.
Bill P-U-G-H. Pugh. Bill Pugh.
Bill Pugh. Bill Pugh, we hope that you enjoy your breakfasts upcoming. All right? Now, those are some of the things that Dr. Nedley promoted to help us with our attitudes. But another thing that he said was good music. So,
Martha Kovrig.
Martha Kovrig, In Perfect Peace. Beautiful music there. You can take that to Martha. Martha, are you here? Martha? All right, there you go. There you go.
Chuck Evans.
Chuck Evans, are you here? Chuck, there you go. This is for Chuck. Again, a beautiful, peaceful music to help your mental attitude. All right?
Jean Honig.
Jean Honig, there you go. This one here is called Sunlight, another beautiful music CD.
Aurora Molina.
Aurora, are you here? Aurora, all right, there she is. Uplifting Worship, another beautiful music CD. Bob Waggerly, are you in here? Are you here? Did you stay? They left. Do. Somebody else has got a choice.
Ramona Lee.
Ramona Lee, are you here? Ramona Lee, yep, there she is. Ramona Lee is getting classical music selections to optimize your brain. All right. And our last gift.
Janice Ebel.
Janice, there you go. Another beautiful music CD to optimize your musical brain. So, for all of you who registered, let me just remind you once again that those of you who registered are going to be notified when other events of this caliber and quality come up. And so if you didn't register, you want to make sure that we have your name a phone number that can receive a text or an email, because that's how we're going to do it. All right, we're just going to fire off these messages. Hey, Dr. Nedley's coming back. Ooh, or other exciting events like that. All right. It is now Q&A time. I have to confess to you that this is going to be a short Q&A time, and I apologize for that. But Dr. Nedley has to get down to California for his next appointment, and we just want to thank him in a very special way for taking time out of his schedule to be a part of our outreach to our community and our in-reach to help us live better lives. You want to give him another round of applause?
Question right here.
Actually, I got the microphone.
Oh, wait a minute. Who has the mic? Whoever has a microphone, stand up, and that way I can see you. Oh, there you go. Go ahead.
I actually have 3 questions. Hopefully, they'll be pretty quick. With regard to caffeine, I know that chocolate contains caffeine and theobromines. Is that an issue as well?
Theobromine is not so much of an issue as the caffeine, but the problem with the chocolate is, cocoa, it's one of these things that has benefits and risks. Cocoa is an antioxidant, and the coffee bean has antioxidants. But of course, the risk component of the cocoa is to make it palatable. You have to dump sugar and saturated fat into it.
Right.
And so it's the sugar and saturated fat that is far more of the issue in regards to chocolate than necessarily the theobromine. Now, theobromine is an issue for men because of prostate cancer. There has been quite an association between theobromine consumption and prostate cancer, but not in regards to other definite issues related to the theobromine. And of course, saturated fat's going to increase your production of cholesterol. I didn't go into that, but that's going to more than double your liver's output of cholesterol. And it's one of the reasons why we don't recommend coconut oil. Coconut oil is very saturated.
Right.
And there's this vegan chocolate out there that has the cocoa and the coconut oil for the saturated fat, plus sugar, which is also, quotes, a vegan food. And that combination is going to produce some issues, if you're using it any regular basis in regards to mental health because of the other adverse effects.
Okay, supplements, is there an issue with what supplement company you use based on?
Yes, there is an issue.
regulated?
Not all supplement companies are the same, and so we want nutraceutical companies. If you go out there to the table, you'll see these are the ones that have been tried and true and tested in regards to randomized controlled trials. Make sure it has what it says it in there without the impurities.
Okay.
And so you want to be careful in regards to that. But the companies out there that we have are well documented to be clean.
Okay, and last but not least, I have 2 young boys, and I'd like to go down to 2 meals a day, but is there an issue with taking children down to 2 meals a day? Because if they're in an Adventist school, they have 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes to eat. And so what is the best approach with them?
Yeah, well, it depends on how young the children are. When they're infants, they might need to eat every 2 hours, and that's okay when it's human breast milk. And as they get older, most of the kids can do well on 3 meals a day by the time they're school age, and some can do well on 2 meals a day. But the best way is, are they maintaining their weight? Or are they getting too underweight, and how is that growth going? And as long as they're able to maintain their weight, even children can be on a 2 meal a day program. But most of them are probably going to need 3 until they're 10 or 11 or 12. Yes.
I'd like to ask you to give some notes for nutritional treatment for Alzheimer's.
Okay, some more in regards
Alzheimer's,
to
autism.
autism. Okay, let me talk about that because there's some overlap in regards to some genetic issues that I want to mention regarding autism. By the way, the B12, let me see if I can go back. And sorry about this, we have to go all the way back. But you notice B12 also helped with methylation, particularly methylcobalamin. But the best detoxifying B12 is hydroxycobalamin. That can help with both overmethylation and if there's just a B12 issue. And this is detoxifying. Most of the B12 you have on the market is called cyanocobalamin. That is a cyanide molecule that's a toxin, and the B12 can still help you, but you really want to look at your sources of B12 if you're getting that, and we recommend the hydroxy. Go ahead.
So you all can continue to ask questions, but to get him out of here on time, they're going to do tear down in literally a few minutes back there. So if you said, I really wanted to buy a book or I wanted to buy something, you want to stay here, you want to be there, you don't have that omnipresent thing down, but if you're going to buy, you better get out there and get while he continues to answer questions.
Okay, but in regards to autism, let me mention something that we also see in 17% of our patients that come through our program. These are ones with significant anxiety and depression, and we do take highly functioning autistic individuals in our program. But many of them actually have a metal metabolism disorder. And this is something where we have to see how they're carrying metals. And there are some epigenetic tests that we see in regards to this, and often we will see autistic individuals with an inability to handle copper well. When their copper levels go up, their tyrosine, we talked about tyrosine earlier today, tyrosine is going to easily go into norepinephrine, but it's going to be blocked going into dopamine. So they end up with too much norepinephrine and not enough dopamine. And we have to get those copper levels down. Now, what are some of the symptoms that even non-autistic people can get? Anxiety, temper, anger, particularly the hormonal depression, your postpartum depression, your PMS. When you're postpartum depression, and you get more migraines as well as food sensitivities. These people that are sensitive to this food and that food and all of these sort of reactions that they tend to get. This is often due to an underlying issue of a metal metabolism disorder. And we will actually find that they do better with zinc. We will give them, and it has to be the right amount of zinc because we have to build up slowly. If we give them the amount of zinc they need right off the bat, their copper levels come down too quickly because zinc gets rid of copper, and it'll almost be like they're coming off of benzos. They'll have some anxiety, so we have to build it up slowly, and B6 can help with this as well. So for autism, the question was related to autism. This is where we would utilize the judicious use of zinc and B6, and then we would remeasure to see where their free copper levels are. The big thing that we're looking at is not total copper, but free copper, and we're trying to get that under 25%, and we can see a significant benefit that way. So, what's that?
I'm all right. I can stand.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the follow-up. Was there a follow-up question related to that? Oh, less than 25% free copper. Now, your doctor won't be able to, unless they're into epigenetics, they're not going to be able to even tell you what your free copper level is, because the typical test is going to look at a total copper. So you have to actually measure the protein, and the protein is something that is more genetically based, and so you have to compare that total copper level with the protein that carries it to calculate the free copper. So you need to kind of have an epigenetic expert to be able to help you through this. Your typical doctor might look at the copper and say, well, it looks like it's okay, but they don't realize the protein level is so low that the free copper is a major issue in regards to the mental health.
Doctor.
Okay, another question.
Right here.
Yes.
Doctor, 5 years ago I had a stroke. I had an acute thalamic infarction, and I'm wanting to feed my brain the best way possible. And I had a group of people in the medical industry say that I should take a lot of collagen protein and things like that. Could you just give some suggestions to feed my brain so I don't have another stroke?
Okay, well, that's a great question. And the circulation, of course, stroke is when the circulation is disrupted by either a clot or a bleed. Do you know if yours was a bleeding stroke or a clotting stroke? It was a bleed.
Oh, no.
It was a clotting stroke. Okay. So with a clotting stroke, we want to be able to get those blood vessels clean so that they're not apt to clot. It's those fatty streaks that when blood cells go past them and those fatty streaks actually ulcerate, that you build up the clot. And so this would be very important to get that cholesterol down to less than 100 plus your age. It'd be very important to get your LDL ideally down to less than 70. And of course, this can be done with some of the diets that we were starting to talk about, the more plant-based, getting oxidized cholesterol out of the diet, getting the antioxidants high, and that can be very stroke preventative. In addition, we'd want to make sure your blood pressure is controlled. Do you have high blood pressure? I control it. Okay. Yeah, and we'd like to see that blood pressure. A stroke-free blood pressure is less than 120/80. And so we like to see it down there nice and low. And this is where even things like tyrosine might come in to help naturally to get that blood pressure down so you're not having to have too many side effects of the blood pressure medicine. And then sodium reduction. We want anyone with high blood pressure to read their labels and have less milligrams of sodium than calories per serving. And so you can always compare those two, calories per serving, milligrams of sodium, less milligrams of sodium than calories. If it's more milligrams of sodium, it's going to raise your blood pressure than the calories. And so reading the labels would be very important. So if we get the cholesterol down, blood pressure down, you're not a smoker, good. That can be very helpful. Nitric oxide is something that actually dilates the arteries and improves the circulation. And you can get more nitric oxide by foods higher in arginine. And so you might want to get Nutrition in the Brain, The Lost Art of Thinking. There's a big chapter in there, and it'll give you the foods that are highest in arginine. And that will produce better nitric oxide levels and help to get better circulation in there to the brain. But yeah, no, it's very good to be well motivated to preserve that brain and to get as good circulation there, because who we are is our brains. All right, now somebody else has given the microphone.
Yeah, Dr. Nedley, this is a question about type 2 diabetes. I'd like to know, I was told that it's possible to reverse type 2 diabetes with diet and exercise, and I'm wondering if that's true. And I also would like to know what foods would be the best to eat that would lower my blood sugar. And just on the side note, you were talking about all the vitamins and stuff. Is there a particularly one multivitamin that I could use just once a day that would have all the vitamins that you would that you're talking about? Thank you.
Okay. So the first question in reversing type 2 diabetes, the answer to that is absolutely it can be reversed. In fact, we have a program at Weimar. I'm not the medical director of that particular program. I'm the medical director of the mental health aspect. But the diabetes reversal program is called the New Start program, and it has a very high success rate in reversing type 2 diabetes, where the gene, type 2 diabetes is one of those things where genetics loads the gun and lifestyle pulls the trigger. So one of your parents gave you the gene, if not both, and then the lifestyle component activated that gene. And so if we get you on the right diet and lifestyle, that gene will become inactive and the type 2 diabetes can actually go away. But it's a process, and it's well worth that process because diabetes has so many complications. So I'd encourage you to get in touch with New Start and even consider going down there for a little residential program to know how to be able to get the right foods that are going to help lower that blood sugar and all of that. That would be a whole nother presentation if I went into that aspect of things. And is there a one-size-fits-all vitamin? There is not, unfortunately, because a lot of vitamins, if you don't know what you're doing, you're getting mega doses of certain things that might actually block the uptake of others. And it really is individual in regards to things. Now, if there was a one-size-fits-all, because B12 deficiency is so common among meat eaters and vegetarians, B12 is not made by plants, nor is it made by animals. It's made by healthy bacteria. And if we don't have healthy bacteria, B12 is not going to hurt us at all. And so maybe a B12 supplement could be something that everybody could use, like that hydroxycobalamin out there. But outside of that, it's really depends upon the individual. And of course, that's why we look at all of those things in the blood work to see what a person is lacking. But if at all possible, it's better to get your vitamins from food if you can. B12 is one of those that isn't in food. It's by healthy bacteria, so that's why I mentioned particularly B12. Okay, the lowered blood sugar ones are going to be primarily your vegetables and primarily your legumes. So beans are good almost at every meal for a diabetic. And if you're going to eat fruit, you want to stick with the northern fruit. The tropical fruit, you're going to get blood sugar spikes. But the northern fruit, like the berries that you have, even apples, those types of things are okay, but you want to stay away from the mangoes and the grapes and the more citrus southern tropical fruits. Okay, yes.
I'm from Sweet Home, Lebanon, and I just moved here with my husband. And I have a lot of friends, several girlfriends that actually have died on strokes in their early 60s, fallen on the ground and died. I also have several friends that have, 2 girlfriends that have actually died of committing suicide just in the past few years. My question is, and I've talked to several people who have gone to your clinic and very successful results. I was wondering, I'm really interested in fasting, and all the fasting books I read that you have to go through, you're supposed to be in a sanitarium to fast. They recommend that. So do you do that? Would you do a long time fast for somebody if they came to your clinic?
Okay, so the question about fasting, and again, it depends upon the individual. Some individuals that even come through our 10-day residential program, when we do that first evaluation, we're actually going to fast them for about a day. It actually turns on the positive neuroplasticity switches. It's going to help once we start giving them the right nutrition for them to take a break and actually go through a fast. In our diabetes program, I don't want to discourage the gentleman that just asked about diabetes, but in the diabetes program, often we're actually doing a medically supervised 3-day fast. And they actually get a meal when they first come to the program, and then after that, they gear them up for the fast. It is a voluntary thing where they take hold of it, but of course we have nurses and it's medical supervision and those type of things. But it's amazing what happens with the biochemistry as a result of that 72-hour fast. It can produce some significant benefit, and then when we give them the right foods, like I just mentioned, the legumes and those sorts of things, we'll see those blood sugars normalize. We'll see the insulin responsiveness go up significantly, and there can be other benefits. So do we fast everybody? No. And even in our 10-day program, we don't fast everybody. We also have one of the symptoms of depression can be weight gain from self-medicating with food, but we also have weight loss with anorexia and those sorts of things that are also associated with mental health problems. And of course, those individuals will not be fasting. And so interestingly, in our program, those that are underweight, they all gain weight, and those that are overweight, they all lose weight during the 10 days, even though they're in the same program, in part due to the individualized care that's given.
Okay, we got 4 minutes.
Thank you.
I get some up. Okay. Hi, Dr. Nedley. The questions are going to be, flax seeds don't seem different going in as they do coming out. Is there a reason for that? And since I have MS, the doctors have given me sertraline to compensate for more energy. They're saying instead of depression to give you energy or whatever, it's to give you energy because of the MS. And so you talked about Selexin and Lavella, which you don't have right now, instead of sertraline to get off of one of the pills that they have me on?
Okay, so a good question. The first question was about flaxseed. Why does it not look much different coming out as it did coming in? This is one of the reasons why we recommend ground flaxseed, because you're going to get a lot more of the nutrition. Flaxseed is okay, eating it as the flaxseed itself, and of course it increases the fiber, but it becomes a flaxative. It's going to, of course, help constipation and those sorts of things. But if we grind the flaxseed, we're going to get the omega-3 and a lot more nutrition. Now, does it mean if the seed comes out we didn't get anything? No, we actually do absorb some through that seed membrane, so we're actually getting a little bit of the nutrition, but not near as much as if we grind it. And then the second question was in regards to, let's see, remind me again. Oh yes, the MS, the multiple sclerosis, and he is on, I think, sertraline, it's SER, sertraline, which is Zoloft. This is one of those SSRIs. This is actually plugging the vacuum cleaners of serotonin going back up into the neuron. And so a much better choice would be something like saffron, or of course, we would want to measure you. If you came, we'd want to do some of these epigenetic things. If you're an undermethylator, you would do far better with SAMe than with sertraline. And so I don't know if you have any of those undermethylating characteristics that I was talking about, but if you did, it's something you could try, and that could be a very good replacement for a lot of people that are taking SSRIs. Yes, yeah, and it's certainly, SAMe is going to have some potential benefit in regards to MS, and saffron would also have some potential benefit as well. Okay, now can MS be completely reversed? No, it can be controlled. We can't necessarily cure it, but we can control it. And so it's not quite the same as type 2 diabetes, where we can back it all the way up. All right, he has a microphone.
You mentioned about the keto diet. I didn't get you clearly, so I want you to briefly explain to me like the advantages and disadvantages, and also you are giving some recommendations of another diet that you could use instead of the keto diet.
Okay. So to make it more clear, how do we know whether you're generating ketones on the diet? It actually is a urine test. And the urine test will actually show those ketones there. And if you're on the diet that I recommended, a plant-based diet that is breakfast and lunch and not supper, you're going to be generating ketones, and you're going to be on a keto diet. And so, but most Americans, when they think of a keto diet, they're thinking of getting rid of all of their plants and basically eating meat and a very low-carb diet. And yes, they'll generate ketones that way, but it's at quite a cost as far as expense in regards to better nutrition. They're only getting the ketosis benefits, and they're not really getting much of the other benefits. So my ketosis diet is a plant-based ketosis diet. Breakfast and lunch and no supper, and you'll get the same advantages that they do on their ketosis diet, but then you'll get all of the good neurotransmitters and the good antioxidants and all of that.
Well, this gentleman, I understood, went to a psychological thing in Europe, and he gave his presentation with a bunch of other docs, and afterwards you could do Q&A. No one asked him any questions. Am I telling the story right? And then he asked his translator, why don't they ask him any questions? He said, I don't believe you. No one gets as good a success as you do. So obviously you all believe that you can do something better here, because that's why we're Q&A. I have to apologize that the Q&A is over, but let's thank Dr. Nedley once again for coming. And with your all support, maybe we can bring him back in another year from now.
There's a little follow-up to that question. Yeah, that was in Germany a number of years ago, and I was shocked. Normally I get lots of questions, and afterwards I asked if there were questions. Not one, well, actually one person raised their hand on a clarification, and I answered it. And then it was done. But in the afternoon, that was a plenary session. In the afternoon, there was a bunch of breakout sessions, and they all came to my session, and the other ones were empty. So even though they didn't ask any questions, they still wanted to learn a lot more. And after that session, they started asking more. They realized there was truth behind this. But at first, they were skeptical because in the psychiatric world, people aren't used to seeing the results. And I showed those results up front first. I didn't even show you guys all the statistics and the results that we get from our program. But those results were so outside the norms that they thought something is not right.
And this is because he uses a holistic approach. He's not using one panacea, one silver bullet. It's holistic. And you know, really, bottom line is that's what the Lord wants for you. He wants you to prosper. He wants you to be in good health. But it's a package deal. You can't say, I want good health and French fries. Supersize that. You say, I want to go all the way with Jesus. Thank you all for coming. Can we bow our heads in a word of prayer? Father in heaven, for the knowledge that you have gifted us with through Dr. Nedley, we praise your name. We thank you for his resources. We praise your name. We thank you. We ask that you would give Dr. Nedley traveling mercies as he heads back to California for his next meeting yet today. And I ask, Lord, that you would be with each of us as we seek to follow your will and implement your good knowledge for our lives. You've told us in your word that we could know the truth, and you told us in your word that the truth would set us free. May each of us find that freedom that comes from knowing and following you in an absolute surrender state. May we unconditionally give our hearts to you. Amen. Thank you all for coming. God bless.